What if one of the most powerful tools for restoring a dying river wasn't a massive dam, a $1 million machine, or a complicated piece of technology? What if it was just rocks? That sounds almost too simple to be true. But across parts of the American West, scientists and conservationists have discovered that carefully placed rocks, wood, and natural structures can completely change the way a damaged stream behaves. And in one remarkable restoration effort, more than 10,250 Rio Grande cutthroat trout were released into restored streams in New Mexico's Valle Vidal in 2023. The story behind that recovery reveals something fascinating about nature. Sometimes, restoring an ecosystem doesn't mean building something new. Sometimes, it means remembering how the ecosystem was supposed to work in the first place. And that's where our story begins. The river that was losing its fish. Imagine standing beside a mountain stream in the American West. The water is cold. The landscape is beautiful. Pine trees cover the hillsides. At first glance, everything looks healthy. But underneath the surface, something is wrong. The stream may be too shallow. During dry periods, water temperatures can rise. Fast-moving water can wash away sediment and habitat. Young trout struggle to find places to hide. And when floods arrive, the river can become even more destructive. For a fish like the Rio Grande cutthroat trout, these problems can be devastating. This trout is native to the Rio Grande Basin, but its historic range has been dramatically reduced. In fact, Rio Grande cutthroat trout are estimated to occupy only about 12% of the waterways they once inhabited. So conservationists faced a difficult question. How do you bring a native fish back when the environment it needs has disappeared? You could simply release more fish. But that doesn't necessarily solve the problem. If the habitat is still damaged, the fish may have nowhere safe to reproduce. The real solution is much more fundamental. Fix the river first. The crazy idea: use rocks. This is where stream restoration gets surprisingly interesting. A healthy mountain stream isn't simply a ditch filled with water. It is a constantly changing system. Water moves around rocks. Pools form behind obstacles. Shallow riffles provide oxygen. Deep areas give fish shelter. Vegetation stabilizes the banks. Logs and boulders break up the current. And all of these features create different habitats for different stages of a fish's life. But when humans alter a stream, those natural structures can disappear. The result can be a simplified channel where water rushes straight downstream. That's bad news for trout. So restoration specialists sometimes do something that looks almost ridiculous to an outsider. They put rocks back into the river. Not randomly. Not by simply dumping a pile of stones into the water. The structures are placed strategically to change water flow and rebuild habitat. A rock can split a current. A group of rocks can create a deeper pool. Another structure can slow erosion. And suddenly, a section of stream that looked almost useless can begin behaving more like a natural river. To someone standing on the bank, it might look like nothing more than a pile of rocks. To a trout, it can be an entire neighborhood. Why trout love structure? Here's the part that makes the strategy so fascinating. Trout don't simply need water. They need the right kind of water. A trout has to balance several competing needs. It needs food. It needs oxygen. It needs protection from predators. And it needs places where it can conserve energy. Imagine swimming continuously against a powerful current. You would become exhausted. A trout faces the same basic problem. That's why pools, rocks, logs, undercut banks, and other structures are so important. Behind an obstacle, the current can become slower. The trout can position itself there and wait for insects and other food to drift past. The fish gets access to moving water without having to fight the strongest part of the current. It's an incredibly efficient survival strategy. And that's exactly why changing the physical structure of a stream can have such a powerful biological effect. The river becomes a fish hotel. Think about what happens when restoration structures are added. The first thing that changes is the water. Instead of flowing in one uniform channel, the current begins to move differently. Some areas become faster. Others become slower. Pools become deeper. Sediment begins settling in different locations. Aquatic insects get more places to live. Plants can establish themselves along the banks. And eventually, fish begin using the new habitat. The river is becoming more complex. And complexity is often exactly what a healthy ecosystem needs. A single stretch of stream can contain dozens of tiny environments. A shallow area for feeding. A deep pool for resting. A sheltered pocket for young fish. A rocky section where insects cling to the bottom. A protected area where fish can escape predators. What looks like a simple river from above can actually be a three-dimensional ecosystem. And rocks help create that complexity. Then come the trout. Once the habitat improves, conservationists can begin rebuilding the fish population. This is where the number 10,250 becomes especially important. In 2023, more than 10,250 Rio Grande cutthroat trout were released into streams in Vallevidal, New Mexico, marking a major conservation milestone. But here's the key point. The number isn't impressive simply because there were thousands of fish. The bigger story is what those fish represent. They represent an attempt to restore a native species to places where it had become rare. And stocking fish is only one piece of that puzzle. If the habitat isn't suitable, releasing thousands of trout won't magically create a self-sustaining population. The long-term goal is much bigger. You want the fish to survive. You want them to grow. You want them to reproduce. And eventually, you want future generations of trout to exist without humans constantly having to replace them. That's the difference between stocking fish and restoring a fishery. Why the method sounds too simple. There's something almost counterintuitive about ecological restoration. We're used to thinking that bigger problems require bigger solutions. A damaged river. Build an enormous engineering project. A declining fish population. Develop a sophisticated breeding program. A disappearing habitat. Spend millions rebuilding it. But ecosystems don't always respond to complexity. Sometimes the most effective solution is to restore a missing natural process. If a stream historically contained large rocks and woody debris, replacing those structures can help restore the physical conditions that fish evolved with. It's not magic. It's ecology. The objective isn't to force nature to behave differently. It's to remove some of the obstacles preventing nature from behaving naturally. The science behind the rocks. So what exactly can rocks accomplish? First, they can alter the velocity of water. When flowing water encounters an obstacle, its speed and direction change. That creates areas of turbulence, slower flow, and sometimes deeper pools. Second, structures can influence sediment. Instead of allowing every particle to race downstream, slower sections can give sediment an opportunity to settle. Third, rocks provide physical habitat. Small fish can find shelter around them. Aquatic insects can attach themselves to surfaces. And larger fish can position themselves where currents deliver food. Fourth, properly designed structures can help stabilize portions of a stream channel. That doesn't mean every rock placement automatically improves a river. Poorly designed restoration can fail. Structures have to be appropriate for the stream, its flow, its geology, and its flood conditions. That's why successful restoration requires biology, hydrology, field observations, and careful monitoring. The rocks may look simple. The science behind where they go is not the bigger problem. But there's an even deeper lesson here. A fish population doesn't exist independently from its environment. A trout isn't just a fish. It's part of an entire network. Healthy trout depend on healthy water. Healthy water depends on functioning stream channels. Stream channels depend on surrounding forests, soils, vegetation, and seasonal water patterns. Aquatic insects provide food. Riparian plants provide shade. Shade helps keep water temperatures lower. And the entire system is connected. Damage one part, and the effects can spread. Restore one part, and sometimes the benefits spread too. That's why conservationists increasingly focus on habitat restoration, not simply individual species. The fish are the visible result. The real restoration is happening underneath them. From joke to proof of concept. This is also why the idea of using simple natural materials can seem almost unbelievable. A pile of rocks doesn't look like advanced technology. It doesn't have a screen. It doesn't need electricity. It doesn't produce a dramatic sound. But if those rocks recreate conditions that a native fish needs, they can become part of a much larger ecological recovery. And that changes the way we think about conservation. Instead of asking, how do we manufacture more fish? We can ask, why can't the river support fish on its own? That second question is much more powerful. Because if you solve the habitat problem, you're not just helping today's fish. You're potentially helping generations of fish. The 10,250 fish are only the beginning. The release of more than 10,250 Rio Grande cutthroat trout in Valle Vidal is therefore better understood as a milestone rather than a final victory. Nature doesn't provide guarantees. A fish release doesn't automatically mean a population will recover permanently. The fish still have to survive. They have to find food. They have to avoid predators. They have to withstand droughts and floods. And eventually, they have to reproduce. That's why conservation programs require monitoring long after the initial restoration work is completed. Scientists need to know, are the fish surviving? Are they growing? Are they reproducing? Are populations expanding? Is the habitat continuing to function? Those measurements tell researchers whether restoration is actually working. Why this matters far beyond trout. You might be wondering why anyone should care about one trout species in one region of the United States. The answer is that trout are indicators. Cold water fish can be sensitive to changes in stream conditions. When a river becomes too warm, too polluted, too simplified, or too unstable, fish populations can suffer. So restoring trout habitat can also mean restoring broader ecological functions. More habitat complexity can benefit insects. Better streamside vegetation can improve bank stability. Healthy riparian areas can provide shade. And functioning waterways can support entire communities of organisms. The trout are simply one of the most visible signs that the system is becoming healthier. The most surprising lesson. There is something almost poetic about this story. The same river that appears weak and damaged can sometimes contain the ingredients for its own recovery. The water is still there. The fish may still exist somewhere nearby. The insects may still survive. Native plants can return. And natural processes can begin functioning again if humans give them the right conditions. Sometimes, the missing ingredient is surprisingly ordinary. A log. A boulder. A patch of vegetation. A deeper pool. A slower current. Small changes can create large consequences when they restore the relationships an ecosystem depends on. So the next time you see a river flowing quietly through the mountains, don't just look at the water. Look closer. Look at the rocks. Look at the pools. Look at the vegetation along the banks. Look at the places where the current slows down. Because beneath that apparently simple landscape is an incredibly complicated world. And sometimes, rebuilding that world doesn't require futuristic technology. It requires understanding how nature already works. The story of the Rio Grande cutthroat trout is a reminder that conservation isn't always about controlling nature. Sometimes, it's about giving nature the tools it lost. And if carefully restored habitat can help bring thousands of native trout back into historic waters, then perhaps the most powerful technology we have isn't a machine at all. Maybe it's nature itself. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more incredible discoveries about science, wildlife, technology, and the hidden forces shaping our planet. Because sometimes, the smallest changes can create the biggest comeback.